You've probably heard the statement, you can't change anyone else. And I wonder if you've ever asked yourself the question, what is the other correlating truth? We're going to continue talking about change today in ourselves and in others. And I'm going to give you 7 steps when you want to see and help somebody else change, but you know you can't take ownership and responsibility for that. Stay tuned.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these 3 key aims. If you're a parent, you also learn how to raise empowered kids, ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
Welcome back. We are continuing our mini-series on change. And today what we're going to focus on is the corollary truth to the idea that you can't change anybody else. Is it true you can't change anybody else? Yes, that's true. But did you know that there is a correlating truth to that? Well, there is. And we are going to talk about that today. And you're going to leave with 7 action items that you can use when it comes to change. Now, certainly you can use these for yourself as well, but these are specifically designed for when you want to see change happen in another person. And speaking of change is going to be coming to this podcast. So stay tuned because over the next few weeks, I'm going to be announcing some of the changes that are coming, just kind of giving you a little bit of a brief heads up right now. And if you want to be the first to know and you want to be able to have more resources and support and help along your life, then I encourage you to go to the website stephaniepresents.com, sign up for my weekly newsletter. It's currently titled High Impact, but I'm just going to let you know there's a change coming to that name as well. But let's get back to today's topic. Over the last few weeks, as we've looked at change, we've talked about some of the things that we need to keep in mind as we are looking at change in ourselves or other people. And we reviewed 3 fallacies from the things we need to be aware of when it comes to change. We talked about the fact that information alone doesn't change us. I wish that were true. I wish that all I needed was data and then that would just poof magically lead me to change. But yeah, it doesn't work that way. I can look at a box of cookies and a bag of potato chips and I can look at the calorie count right there. And does that automatically motivate me to go, whoa, that's like 70% of my saturated daily fat total, and wow, there's 460 calories when I eat 4 potato chips. I don't think I'm going to have those. Well, it doesn't work that way. We also talked about the myth of the rock bottom and how, somebody hits rock bottom and then poof, that's going to motivate them to change, because the reality is too many people hit what we might call rock bottom and they don't recover. And also we talked about shame. Now, I will tell you, shame can be a great motivator if all you're wanting to do is to get someone to do something temporarily. But if you want healthy change, if you want meaningful, sustainable change, shame is not the way to go. We also talked about the number 1 obstacle to change is that we just don't really think it's possible. We get discouraged. We've tried something so many times in the past, or somebody else's, we've heard their promises before. And after a while, we begin to believe change just isn't really possible. And so we have to be mindful of, are we willing to have our mindset changed, first of all, just to believe that change is possible? And then we also looked at how pain can motivate change. And to be certain, it often does. Sometimes when the pain of not changing becomes greater than the pain of changing, then a person decides to change. That's a bit of a mouthful, but you're a smart audience and you understand what I'm saying there. But it's also true that sometimes pain is the very thing that prevents a person from changing, because pain can, I'm not saying it always does, but I am saying that pain can have a payoff. It can have a benefit. And that benefit is that it keeps us in a certain perspective, in a certain position where other people don't ask as much from us, and we don't have to ask as much from ourselves. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that pain always has that benefit, but I'm saying it can. So you've probably heard the statement that you can't change anybody else. Absolutely true. But have you ever thought, what's the correlating truth to that statement? Because as you recall, if you've been listening to these episodes at all, then you know that one of the things that I really focus on is all truth there's these correlating truths. There's God is sovereign and people have free will. And those are two truths. They don't contradict each other, but they do create a tension between them. And a life of maturity is lived when we embrace that tension. And that's a hard thing to do. And that's why a lot of people don't really mature, and spiritually, emotionally, relationally, is because they're not willing to step into living in the tension that is created between two correlating truths. It's just easier to let go of one. I mean, we might kind of give it lip service, but we don't really live like it's true. So every time that there is a statement that's true, such as, well, you can't change anybody else, I want you to get into the habit of asking yourself, okay, what's the correlating truth? What's the other truth that I need to be holding on to that is going to create some tension, but it's in this tension where I am going to find health and growth and maturity and effectiveness. So we're going to talk about this today. You're going to leave today with 7 practical steps that you can take in addressing this issue of, well, you can't change somebody else, but what's the correlating truth? It is this. You absolutely can and do influence others. You know, I have experience in the classroom as a teacher. And although I've taught all different age levels and a lot of different subjects, most of my teaching has been centered around young people in the high school years, some in the middle school years, but also in the high school years. And I absolutely love working with teenagers and adolescents. They're like my all-time favorite group of students to work with. But I have definitely had students who have sat in my classrooms, and the only reason that they were there is because they had to take the class to graduate. Otherwise, they had zero desire to be there. If I only held on to the truth, well, you can't change anybody else, and I've definitely seen teachers that do that, it becomes very easy then to label those students. Well, I can't change them. I mean, if they don't want to be there, I can't motivate them. I mean, and especially when you're looking at somebody who's like a junior or senior in high school, it becomes really easy to take that approach with them because you're thinking, hey, you're like a year or two away from graduating and you're going to go off into the quote adult world and all this kind of stuff. Okay, I can't help you. If you haven't figured it out by now, if you're not motivated by now, well, that's just on you, kid. And too many times teachers do take that attitude. They do hold on to the truth that you can't change anybody else because that's true. But what they don't also embrace is the other truth, which is, but I absolutely can influence and impact someone else. And when a person does take that approach, they end up creating a much better educational experience for both the students who do want to be there and the students who don't. Now, it's true. A teacher can do everything possible, and because it's true, you can't change somebody else. A student can decide it doesn't matter what you do as a teacher in how you approach the material or in how you treat them. They're just going to have a stinky attitude no matter what. That's true. But I've also seen where a student can change. Now, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden they are going to totally fall in love with the material and the content, and that's what they're going to devote the rest of their life to studying. But it does mean that they can change their attitude and their perspective enough, not sometimes just about the material, but about themselves. And that is far more powerful than just changing their attitude about the content. Now, we instinctively understand if we are parents that, yeah, we absolutely influence and impact somebody else. I mean, otherwise, we would just throw up our hands with our kids and say, oh, well, you just want to be a whiner. Oh gosh, sorry, I can't do anything about that. Or you just want to be a really picky eater. Oh, well, can't do anything about that. Or, oh, you feel like biting other kids when you're unhappy. Okay, well, I guess you're just going to be a biter in life. I mean, no, we don't do that. We recognize that not only can we, but we have a responsibility to influence and impact their behavior. And obviously, we can't approach the other people in our adult lives as if they're all our kids, right? The same way. But what we can do is to hold both of these truths together. So while we hold on to the truth, you can't change anybody else, we absolutely can hold on to the other truth, which is I have incredible influence and I have impact and I can use that well. So how can you do that? Well, we're going to look at 7 specific different steps that you can take. The first one is we own the power of our influence. I mean, this is about mindset. It's about perspective. We say to ourselves, I have influence. I have impact. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of no, I do. It's just going to be what kind, how much, and how am I going to take ownership and responsibility for that? And so we don't go into it with this helpless mindset. Well, I can't change anybody, so I guess I just can't do anything and I'm just stuck, or, all I can do is, just kind of throw up some kind of boundaries. I don't really even know what that means, but hey, I've heard that. So no. It's that we say, no, I can't change them, but I absolutely will have an influence and impact on them. So I am going to own that influence and that impact, and I'm going to be intentional about how I handle that. I'm going to move from a helpless mindset to an empowered mindset. We own our influence without owning the responsibility for the outcome of that in someone else's life. The second step that we can take is we hold our stories loosely. We tell ourselves dozens, hundreds, thousands of stories every single day. We tell ourselves a story about why the person in the drive-through window at the restaurant is so crabby or so nice. We tell ourselves a story. It might be a 15-second story, but we are telling ourselves a story all the time. We might look at someone's clothing, we look at their hairstyle, and we tell ourselves a story about that person just based on external appearances. Somebody cuts us off in traffic. We tell ourselves a story. Somebody lets us in traffic. We tell ourselves a story. A colleague doesn't come in and talk to us like they normally do. We tell ourselves a story. We tell ourselves stories all the time, not just about ourselves, but about other people. Oh, they didn't say good morning to me when I walked in today because they're upset with me. Oh, they didn't include me on this group text because, whatever. We need to hold the stories that we tell ourselves loosely, because the longer that we tell ourselves a story, the more attached to it we become, the more we will look for explanations of behavior. We have this confirmation bias is real. So we want to live mindful that what we will do by default is we will look for supporting evidence in the stories that we've already told ourselves. it's a whole lot easier. We're far more inclined to want to bring credit to the stories we've already told ourselves than to let go of those and to come up with a new story. One of the things that we can do as people to be mindful of this is to actively try to discredit our stories. So when we've told ourselves a story, this person, the reason that they are doing this is because they really don't care about my feelings in this situation. I mean, they understand this is important to me. I've told them 1,000 times. They just don't care. It's not important to them. And we can tell ourselves that story. And so we will look for evidence to support that story. But as people of maturity, we can and we need to say, okay, let's look for evidence that discredits our stories because maybe our story is wrong. How sad it is that, and I've seen this happen. I mean, this has happened in my own life. I've seen this happen, I don't know, in how many other people's lives over the years. And we even see this in different stories in the Bible. Saul began telling himself a story about David, for example, very early in David's career. And Saul's jealousy led him to begin saying to himself, David is a threat to me. It began with a very small statement, but Saul began to tell himself this story, not based on anything David had done, but based on what other people had said. When Saul first appointed David in these military roles, and David went out and he had great success, and people came back and the women began to sing these songs that said, Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his 10,000s. Now, right there, that is an example of women who didn't really own their impact. Okay, it wasn't really the story and the songs that they should have been singing about. I mean, Saul was king at that point. He was commander of the army. It may have been true that Saul was going out and that he was only killing, thousands, and that maybe David had a lot more success, but it wasn't wise use of their impact and their influence to be singing the songs about that. So what happens is, based on what other people are saying, Saul gets jealous and he begins to tell himself that David is a threat to him. And Saul ends up spending so many years, the whole rest of his kingship from then on until the day that he died, so much of his time and his energy and his resources and the resources of the nation were spent in pursuit of a false enemy, David, instead of the real enemy. Why? Because he wasn't willing to look at his story and to evaluate it and to try to actively discredit it. All the evidence was there right in front of him over and over again. I mean, this goes on for about 13 years. This wasn't just a short-term spat. It wasn't just a matter of a couple of years that Saul is chasing David around and eventually to the point of trying to kill him. No, this is over 13 years. Saul spends all of this time and energy. Why? Because he told himself a story that he was unwilling to exchange. He was unwilling to look for evidence that would discredit the conclusions that he made about David, and he wasted so much of his life, and he missed out, and other people missed out on the relationships that they could have had because Saul tells himself a story. His confirmation bias makes him see things in a twisted and distorted perspective. And because of that, he really misses out on becoming who he could have become as king in terms of his own maturity and in terms of his own success. So we want to be people who hold the stories we tell ourselves loosely. Look for ways to discredit the story that you are telling yourself, not from a place of being paranoid and not ever being able to trust your own mind or the leading of the Holy Spirit, but because we need to be so aware of our tendency to not really understand what somebody else's motives are, not really to be open to someone else's change, and because of this default to confirmation bias. All right, what's the third step? The third step is to pray. Pray on behalf of someone else. James 5:16 says, "Therefore confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working." And that isn't just talking about physical healing, because James goes on in the next couple of verses and he gives as an example when Elijah prayed that there would be no rain in the land of Israel, and there wasn't for 3.5 years. And then at the end of that time, Elijah prays and rain returns to the land. The power of our prayers is something that we just will never, there's a mystery there. There's a tension there. Do our prayers matter? Yes. Is God like a vending machine and we plug enough prayers in and poof, we get the answer that we want? No, that's not how it works either. So is prayer powerful? Is it effective? Does it matter? Yes. Is it also a matter that God doesn't always give us what we want? Yes. So there again, we have these two truths that we hold in balance as a life of a mature believer. Number 4, be actively curious. Seek to understand what's going on in someone's life. Okay, don't seek to just go on a evidence collecting hunt to support the story you've already told yourself. But instead, seek to understand, get curious about them and what is motivating their behavior. One of the stories that I share in a couple of my talks is when one of my sons was a teenager, and he still did some reading, but his reading, just his independent reading, dropped way off. And I told myself a story about why. I didn't do this step that I'm telling you to do now. I didn't get actively curious. I didn't seek to understand what was going on. Instead, I told myself a story. I looked for the evidence to support that, and it just stuck. And several years later, we were in a conversation, and somehow this topic came up, and he said to me, I read all these stories in these books about these people that had accomplished these great things, and I just couldn't see it being a possibility for my life, and it hurt so much that I stopped reading. Oh my gosh, you talk about a mom heart-crushing moment. I mean, that was it. And it's one of the reasons I still remember that exchange, because it was such a powerful lesson, because I blew it. I mean, I wasn't actively curious. I told myself a story, and then I just stuck with that. And I missed a tremendous opportunity that I could have had to have stepped into his life at that point and to understood him and to have nurtured. And I just could have taken an entirely different direction with that. So don't make my mistake from that. Be actively curious to really understand what's going on in somebody else's heart. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. Doesn't mean you have to approve of it, but at least understand it. Number 5, be creative in how you influence. Now, I don't mean look for ways to manipulate, right? But as a parent, for example, sometimes if you want to implant an idea in your child's life, rather than taking the approach of, I'm going to tell you what to do, you can share something about your own experience. And through that, it's kind of a sideways way, kind of mix up the words there, but it's kind of a sideways way to implant an idea, especially in an adolescent's mind about something, when if you come at it real directly, it might just kind of hit that wall where it just bounces back. So look for ways to be creative in how you influence. Again, I'm not saying, hey, use this as a way to try to be manipulative, but be creative. Sometimes you can invite other people into situations. Again, not in a manipulative way, but in a way that is creative. Be smart, be skilled, be effective with your influence. Number 6, be patient. Okay. Change, whether it's in ourselves or someone else, usually takes longer and a more circuitous route than we would like. Okay. It's typically not a graph that's, like up and to the right the whole time, like this straight line that's just growth, 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 growth. No, it's usually doesn't work that way. And so be patient. Okay. That last time I checked, that was one of the fruits of the Holy Spirit at work with us. So be patient as you wait and you pray and you own the influence that you have in a situation to bring about change. And number 7, stay focused on your own changes, because it's true. At the end of the day, the only person that we can change is ourselves. And we can become like Saul really, really quick. And we can get so obsessed over trying to change somebody else. We can become so obsessed on walking out a story and living out a story that we've told ourselves about somebody else that we miss our own opportunities for growth. And that's exactly what happened to Saul. He missed his opportunities for growth and success because he became so absorbed in trying to change what he thought what needed to be changed in David. And he was so far off the mark, and he missed his own life so much because he was so fixated on David's life. That's not just a Bible story that we want to read and go, okay, bad choices, Saul. No, we want to take that and apply that in our own lives. When we really truly stay focused on our own growth and our own changes, then we're going to see growth, and that's going to give us more confidence. It's going to bring us more joy. It's going to bring us a greater sense of of success for ourselves, and that will be a powerful way to fight the cynicism and the despair and the discouragement that can come in when we are just so focused on other people and how they need to change. All right, my friends, speaking of change, as I said, change is going to be coming to this podcast. And so stay tuned. We'll be talking a little bit more about that in upcoming episodes. And if you haven't already, make sure to go to the website, stephaniepresents.com, sign up for the weekly newsletter. And remember, because it's absolutely true, you have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. See you next time.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website, stephaniepresents.com, and sign up for High Impact to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.